Maui, Hawaii is ground zero for the hottest free trade talks in decades, the TPP as it's known. Now, trade ministers of 12 Pacific Rim nations are right there working feverishly to hammer out what many say could be the most important global trade deal in history. It's all playing out on the sandy beaches of Maui, but one nation, not even part of the talks, might be thinking of muscling in. China. As we've been telling you, China's stock market had a horrible month, reeling from its worst monthly drop in 6 years. And a new trade deal like this, without the rising economic superpower, could severely diminish its political and economic influence in the region. As we say, this does matter to you folks because every U.S. business that either sells or buys anything on the global market wants to know, will the TPP become reality today, tonight? Let's bring in Peter Brookes. He's former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asian and Pacific Affairs under President George W. Bush, along with Andy Brenner, Global Strategist for National Alliance Securities, both in a Fox Business exclusive. To you first, Peter, the outcome matters, as we said, to many businesses here in the United States. Is it going to happen? Will they make an agreement tonight?
Well, they're certainly under the gun to do so. But of course, as we saw with the Iran deal, they could push it down the road if they're very, very close. There's been some stuff, as you know, as you mentioned, dairy and pharmaceuticals that have come up in the last few moments. And the United States is actually not going to get in on dairy unless Canada does. So we're going to have to see. But then once again, it has to come back to the United States. Congress is going to have to read it. They're not going to pass it until find out what's in it. They're going to read it first. And then it will be an up or down vote as to whether they approve it or not under the fast track authority. So they may have a deal, but Congress still gets a say.
Well, you know, the Republicans really sided with President Obama on this one. They voted to fast track it. There was a lot of pressure. As I recall, it was one of the most political votes that we've seen in a long time, Andy. But let's talk about where China fits into all of this. China's got to be devastated that it's not part of this, or does it eventually muscle in?
Well, I think no question China gets involved. China needs help right now. You just mentioned their stock market down 14% in this month alone. You've seen a tremendous exit of emerging markets. You've seen a tremendous debacle in commodities prices. China needs help getting their economy going. And if this thing takes off, China will get involved. That will give them credibility. And I think you'll start seeing much more investment, which has left China in the last year, come back in.
Well, we've seen massive amounts of investment actually exiting emerging markets right now. Look at the iShares, and we've seen it drop pretty precipitously. How much money has come out of emerging markets?
$4.5 billion in the last week alone, according to last night.
1 week, folks. $4.5 billion coming out in 1 week. But, Peter, the trade deal here, you mentioned dairy because we mentioned dairy, tobacco. There are some sticking points because, you know, that protectionist fear comes through in any country. But sure. New Zealand exports a lot of milk, but so do we here in the United States, from Wisconsin to Ohio. You know, we've got milk-producing nations here. Will they be hurt if this trade deal goes through? That's a big question.
Well, they're not going to get in. New Zealand and Australia, it seems to me, are sticking together. They're not going to go unless Canada opens up its markets on dairy. You know, Canada has a supply management. They have external tariffs, internal quotas. The United States is not going to get in unless Canada opens up its markets. And the Kiwis and the Aussies has said they, under WTO, under the World Trade Organization, when they went there, they opened up their dairy market. So they said, there's no deal. We're not in unless Canada opens its market. So there's some things that are very important, and obviously to that part of the world, dairy is critically important, as well as to some of the North American partners as well.
And the Chinese are buying a lot of dairy from New Zealand right now, and certainly that's an interesting aspect too. But what's the investment play here, Andy? Which part of the investment pie becomes more attractive if this trade deal goes through?
Well, I think you actually have to look back at Chinese equities, but you have to wait till all this manipulation goes by the board.
This is the government trying to put pillows under the market. Over the past month.
I mean, in their defense, we've seen it in every country. I mean, the U.S., the Federal Reserve's doing it, the ECB's doing it, the Japanese, the central banks are all very much involved. But I think China could actually be a very interesting investment play, again, if this deal takes off and then China gets involved, because it will give them credibility.
And it's a lot cheaper now. I mean, we had a horrible month, folks. If you thought China was too expensive, it's less expensive now. Peter, back to this TPP trade deal. It is extremely ambitious. There are 30 chapters of rules involved in all of it. On top of it, it really does cut trade barriers. There are people who truly believe, and a lot of economists are flipping over to accept this deal, that free trade ends up being, on balance, much better for the world. Are you in agreement with that?
Oh, yeah, I'm a big free trader, but I want to see this agreement first. I mean, I want to see how this came out. Remember, not everybody is going to necessarily agree with President Obama's take on this deal. I mean, there's environmental issues. There's a whole bunch of intellectual property issues, labor law issues. I mean, so people are really going to want to take a close look at this. I think in general, I would say that, yeah, I'm all for free trade. It's good for us. It's good for others. And hopefully this sort of thing, which will comprise 40% of the world's gross domestic product, will get through. But we got to see the deal first, and we're not there yet. Remember, these are secret talks. We're only getting a peek behind the curtain of what's going on.
Except the countdown to the closing bell is worming our way, and that's why we're trying to let people know this. 7:30 p.m. Eastern is the news conference. Stay tuned to foxbusiness.com because the minute the news comes out, they'll have it. Our thanks to Peter Brookes, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Asian Pacific Affairs, along with Andy Brenner, Global Strategist for National Allied Securities. Good to see you both.